We've been studying about when your life is in crisis, when your home's in crisis, when there's a crisis with your enemy, there's a crisis with your soul. And today we're talking about a crisis with yourself. You know, sometimes you get to that point where you just didn't think this would be your life. Whatever's taking place and what's going on, this wouldn't be your life. Sometimes you just don't think you're enough. I think about a lot of the students that when I have interviews and they ask me about different questions, I always pop in mind different students that I've talked with, and I guarantee some this week come across my mind when preparing this lesson, because I have students that do not think they're enough, and I'd imagine if they're facing that, I'd imagine sometimes you probably feel that same way, that I'm just not enough. I'm not convinced of my value or my worth. You just don't think that you have value or worth and anything to offer, and that you don't bring anything to the table. And it's during this time, if you turn to Psalm 139, when you don't think you matter, there's a crisis of self. Sometimes we just can cherry pick verses. And one that would be cherry picked out is in Psalm chapter 8, verse 4, that says, "What is man that you're mindful of him?" And sometimes we just look at that and we think, why does he even care about us? I don't have any value. There's no worth. There's nothing. I don't bring anything to the table. But if you read Psalm 8, you would see that there's a whole lot more to that than just that one verse. But as we look in Psalm 139, we're going to see certain things. And I've left some space there in certain points because there's going to be more than one point in there. I've just left some space for you to take your personal notes and your outline. But the first point is his presence. You see his presence. Looking in verses 1 through 12, we see a little bit of him. And I want to go and I want to read these verses because I think they're important. It's in 139 verse 1. It says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search my own path and my lying down. You're acquainted with all my ways. Even when a word is on my tongue, behold, Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in, behind and before. You lay your head upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too high. I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I take the winds of the morning and dwell in the utmost parts of the sea, even there your hand will lead me. Your right hand shall hold me. And if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you." And I have a hard time anytime reading this Psalms, because this is, to me, it strikes at those times in my life. If I have them, I know you got them too. Those times when you're just not enough, and says his presence is with you. So that should be one thing that you know. You matter. I matter. If his presence is with me, that means I matter. That means you matter. We matter. And it says, not only that, the first point under his presence, under point number 1 is God searches. He searches me. God searches me. It says that he searches me there in verse 1. He searched me and known me. He knows who I am. If you look there in verse 1, it says, when I sit up and when I rise up. He knows my conduct. He knows everything that I do. That's amazing. He knows everything. He knew what was taking place last Monday. He knew what was taking place this past Thursday. He knows you. As it goes on in verse 2, it says, he discerned my thoughts from afar. He knows my thoughts. So he knows when I sit down and when I rise up, and I meant to say verse 2. So he knows everything I do in verse 2. He knows everything I think from verse 2. In verse 3, it says, He's acquainted with all my ways. Man, he knows everywhere I go. Everywhere. There's sometimes where you're trying to, you don't want people to know what you're doing and where you're at, because probably you're not doing something you should be doing. But he knows everything. He knows where I go. He knows those times where I'm doing things I shouldn't be doing. And he knows those times that I'm doing the things that I should be doing. He knows it all. And then in verse 4, it says, if I'm not going to say a word, he knows it before I say it. He knows everything that I'm going to say. Everything. Everything that I'm thinking. And that can be bad. Or it could be good. But either way, he knows everything that I'm going to say before I spit it out. And then in verse 5, it says, you hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Now this is amazing. Everything that I'll be. He knows everything that I'll be. So it says, here he says, you hem me in behind. He knows our past. He says, and before. He knows where we're heading. He knows our future. And it says, you lay your hand on me. He knows the right now. He is right there. He knows everything that we are. He knows the past, us. He knows the future. And he knows currently what's going on in our life right now. He knows the crisis that you're going through right now. He knows what you've been through, what you're going through, and what you're going to go through. That's amazing right there. We have an amazing God. And if you look in verse 6, it says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. So he knows my capacity. He knows my limitations. He knows everything that I am. He knows what I can and can't do. And he's saying right here, David's saying, man, this is too wonderful. The knowledge you have, I can't even grasp that. You know what I can and can't do. You know I can't even reach that. But here we have a God. If you want to know if you matter, you matter. His presence is with you. He has searched you and he knows you. He knows everything about you. Everything that you do, you think, you go, you say, that you'll be, and that you are. He knows it all. That's an amazing thing. So if you're wondering if you have any worth, any value, man, you've got a God that his presence isn't just here and there. He's not a God from afar. His presence is right with you during the good and the bad. And then as it goes on, the second point under his presence is God secures me. God secures me, because I've played in my time. I remember playing a lot of hide and seek when I was little. A lot of hide and seek. I loved it. I loved trying to hide and someone trying to find me. I didn't so much like me trying to find someone, because that was a little bit more difficult. And I thought they might try to scare me, because that was my mentality when I was hiding, that I'm going to scare them. And so I didn't want that coming back at me. So I really didn't like if I was having to seek. But if I was having to hide, that was good. Unless they leave you and you're there in the dark and you're there for hours. But other than that, this is amazing. If you look there in verses 7 and 10, it talks about where can I go from your presence? It says, if I go up, if I ascend to heaven in verse 8, or if I ascend down to Sheol, talking about the grave, either place, you're there. It talks about if I'm out at sea, you're there. You're there everywhere I go. So it doesn't matter the distance. That's amazing. Because sometimes you think you're so far from God that he can't. That he can't find you. Think about those times in your life where you have, you just haven't been what God has desired you to be, what he's commanded you to be. And you think you're so far and there's no way you can get to God. And he's right there. He's been right there the whole time, loving you and helping you. There's no distance far enough that he can't reach you. And there's no place that he's not there. The next part, verse 11 through 12. I told you this is an emotional psalm for me. I thought I could get through this without showing some of that emotion. Verses 11 and 12, it talks about, surely the darkness can cover me. You know, that's when bad things happen, usually at night, when no one can see. That's usually either you're in your room, you're in your house at night, or you're in the community, but it's dark. Wherever you're going, you want it to be dark because you don't want certain people to see the certain activities that you have and that you're doing. But here, it doesn't matter. Because I know that you think about the darkest times in your life. You think about those times where God would be so disappointed in you from the things that you've done, the things that you've thought. Or maybe it's just a dark time in your life or the things that have taken place in your life. Has nothing to do with what you've done, but just the things you're experiencing. And during those dark times, we think that we're all by ourselves and there's no one else that can reach us and that we're isolated and we're alone. And here it says in verses 11 and 12 that even in the darkest of nights, it's not dark for you. You can see me. There's no place so dark that you can't find me. Man, that means you and I matter to God. We are important to him. We have value because there's no distance great enough that he can't get to us. And there's no darkness so dark that he can't get to us. And it says the whole time in verses 1 through 6, he's there through it all. Through the good and through the bad. Point number 2. Starting in verse 13, it says, for you have formed me in your inner parts and knitted me together in my mother's womb. His power. You've got his presence and his power. If his power has been upon you, which means it has because he knitted you together in your mother's womb, that means you matter. And for all these people that choose convenience over creation, where they're looking, and here is a new birth over a convenience of, I'm not feeling it today and I'm going to have an abortion. He's saying, who put it together? He's saying, God put this together. God put you together. He knit you just like he wanted you. I've got this bedspread that me and Monica got as a wedding gift from my coworker. Now, if you want something that's been crocheted, man, she can do it. She can make whatever you want. She'd never made a bedspread, the size that it is, and she's never made one. And she wanted to put a heart, she wanted to do all these different things, make it real special. Really, really nice. And I can't imagine the hours it took. Because I know it was her design. She didn't look at something. It was her design, and she had to think about it and plot it out and put all that together. Every stitch she had to think about as she's doing it. And man, when you put one stitch together another, you just don't think it's going to make a difference at all. Then all of a sudden, it's this beautiful arrangement that she's created. God did that with you. That's amazing. His power is on you because he knit you together in your mother's womb. He's putting you together. He's made your fingernails just exactly the way he wanted them. He's made your fingers exactly the way he wanted them. And the number that he gave you, he wanted you to have those. He made the eye coloring, the hair, all these different things, the body type that you have. Now, I would love to be tall, but he didn't knit me together that way. And so because he didn't knit me together that way, I need to be proud of what I am. And we should be proud of what we are. I know too many times we look in the mirror and we're like, I don't like that. And so we do things to make us look different. God made you exactly the way he wanted you. He knit you together. He took time with you to make you exactly what he wanted you to be. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, it talks about in the New Living Translation that you're his masterpiece. So knowing that, he made you. There's no one like you. There's no other you. He thinks that you matter. And if he knit you together, you do matter. It's amazing. I matter to him. You matter to him. I have value. We have value. His presence is always with you. And how he created you. He knit you together. And then in verse 14, the next part is his pleasure. It says, I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. And so looking at his pleasure, It says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. It talks about in Jeremiah 1:5 that before I was formed, I knew you, is what God's saying there in Jeremiah, that I knew who you were. Jeremiah saying, this is amazing. We knew before we were formed. And also you got to think about, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, we are created in the image of God. He's made us wonderful. We talked about Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. Your version probably says workmanship, but the other one it mentioned, it says masterpiece. We're created for work. We're created to bless and give back to the one who's given us everything. But he tells us how we're made. So if we start questioning our worth, we start questioning our value, and there's a crisis with us and we don't think that God cares about us, we just have to know that he never leaves us. We have to know that he created us at the very beginning. His power, he took time on you to have you made exactly the way you were made. And it tells you how you were made. Fearfully and wonderfully. I mean, that's amazing. And so you think of all the different people in the world. There's no one like you. And you think of all the different people in the world. He's made those people in his image just like you. So they have value. And if they have value and you have value, then we should love them enough, because they're made in his image, to go share with them a message that can help them live with the Creator forever. It talks about how it talks about how fearful and wonderful you're made. So he does this, and it talks about how you're set apart, how you're unique, is what he's talking about when he's talking about fearfully and wonderfully made. It's amazing. Point number 4, his plan. So if you don't think you matter, you can look at his presence is always with you and you matter. If you don't think you matter, you can look at the power that he did to create you and you matter. If you're not sure whether you matter, you look at the pleasure he took in making you, because you're made wonderful. You matter. And you look at his plan in verse 16, and you matter. It says in verse 16, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them. The days were formed for me when as there was none of them. So before I even carried out day one, man, you've got this plan. The plan is simple. The plan, some people talk about, well, everybody has so many chapters, so many pages, all these different things. He's designed everything. No, the plan is simple. The plan is for you to get home, no matter how that is. God says, I want you with me because you matter. I love you so much. I made you special. I made you in my image. And if that's the case, you matter. And it is the case. And so the plan is to do whatever it takes to get you home. You think when you're on a trip, I remember being on a trip and, you're getting low on gas. Man, you'll do whatever you can to get to that gas station, and sometimes all of a sudden you run out. You run out of gas. So what do? Hopefully you have a can so you can go walk down the street or down the road, down the highway to get some more gas. And if you don't, you start thumbing for it to try to have someone help you. You're doing whatever you can to get gas to get home. Think about if that's what we are spiritually. Are we willing to do everything we can to get home? Because you look at this week, did we do everything we could to get home? I'm talking about at the end of the week, we're no longer on this earth. Did we live a life doing work for him, living and loving him and loving each other, and totally trusting him that, man, there's no doubt I'm going home. When my breath is done, when my heartbeat beats for the last time, I'm going home. That's what it needs to be. We need to be living a life ready to go home. We need to do whatever we can because we have a God that thinks we matter. He doesn't just think it, he knows it, and he knows all things. And some of these things are too attainable for us to even grasp. He knows them. He knows his presence is always with us. And his power is among us. His pleasure is for us, and he's got a plan for us to come home. All we have to do is follow the plan. He says that he has your life written down. There's a plan. Before Jesus came to the scene, there was this plan. And then all of a sudden it fulfilled. And now it's a matter of us living righteous, living faithful to get home. It talks about 19 through 22. It says, "Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. The men of blood depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. I do not hate those who hate you. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies." He's not joining in anywhere that's going against God. When there's a group of rebellion against God, he's not joining in, because he's saying through this psalm, there's one thing: my God is enough. He is enough. He's all that I need. He's all that we need. As he goes on, he says in verse 23 and 24, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. And see if there's any grievous way in me, and lead me into the way everlasting." So if he was to search you, if he was to try you, if he was to look inside you and see what there was, what would he see? Would he see there's some correction that needs to be made? Would he need to see there's some tweaks, some adjustments? And if we're honest, we'd all say, yep, that's probably right. We probably need to make some adjustments, some corrections along the way, because what we're doing may not be pleasing him in every aspect. And we need to be smart enough to realize that he knows everything that we're doing. We can't hide it from him. But here, man, David is saying, he's bold enough to say, "Search me. Look at me. Put me on trial. Try me and see. Look to see, man, I am just 100% for you. Just lead me. If there's anything that's not right," there in verse 24, "lead me. Lead me into the way everlasting." So here today for us, if there's anything that's in our way, me included, anything in our way, we need to ask God, lead us in the way of everlasting. He told us how to do it from his words. But it's amazing how we've got this book here. We've got this book, and it has all the answers. You know, years ago, there was a social studies teacher, and his key went missing. Of all the different worksheets that he had, it went missing. Just somehow it disappeared. Well, it found up in some girl's hands. I don't know how that happened. And she became the most popular person in class. Everybody wanted to spend time with her because she had the key. And I look at that, and this is the key right here. We've got everything that we need for life and godliness, as it talks about in Peter. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. Everything we need for life and godliness. But the problem is, sometimes when you have everything you need just given to you, you don't want to look. Sometimes you want someone else to tell you what it says. But he's given us everything. This is it. This is, of all things, if there was a fire, this is what I want to make sure I take out of my place. This is the most important thing I've got. This should be the most important thing that we have. And so when you're in a crisis and you don't think you matter, you need to go back and you need to read Psalm 139. Because you more than matter. He's made all this for your pleasure. And in looking at it in a different way from John in the New Testament, John chapter 3, verse 16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." And so if you don't think you matter, look at it this way. For God, the greatest being ever, so loved the greatest motive ever, the world. That's the greatest number ever. That he gave, that's the greatest act. His only Son, the greatest gift, that whoever, the greatest invitation, that whoever, that's including us, believes in him, the greatest requirement, should not perish, the greatest fear, but have eternal life, the greatest hope. He says, if you don't think you matter, you can look here in the Old Testament, you can look here in the New Testament. I've done everything because you're the only one that does matter to me. You're the one I'm in love with. You're the one that I've done all these things for. That I've time and time again, that I forgive. Time and time again, I overlook those things. I've forgiven you of those things you've done. And I've given you a second chance because I believe in you. I love you with everything I've got. If you doubt me, just think about what I gave up for you. I gave up my son for you because I love you that much. And we've got a son that was willing to die because he loves us so much. So if you question, you need to be reassured that you more than matter. Your life matters. And so for us, we should live a life that's worthy of the gospel that we've been called. So if you're struggling with your life, with your spiritual life, any of those aspects, because Psalm 139 covers it. And Psalms talks about anything that you're going through, any heartache, anything that you're having, any type of emotion. If you're going through anything, he's saying, I want to be the one to help you. So we need to go to him in prayer. And then, if there's any of us that haven't put Christ on, it does say, whoever believes. That belief means a belief that causes you to obey. And that obeying talks about in Mark chapter 16, verse 16, if you believe and are baptized, you're saved. And so it goes on and says, if you don't believe, you'll be condemned. And if you don't believe, there's no way you're going to be baptized. Belief causes someone to be baptized. And that baptism, it talks about in Romans chapter 6. What that does, it gets you a new life. In Acts 22, it talks about it washes away your sins. In Colossians, it talks about it cuts the sin away from your life. It does all these things. And in Galatians chapter 3, it talks about how you become a child of God that way. There's only one way you get into Christ, and it's from baptism. If you want to study about how a person needs to be saved, then let us do that today. Let's set up a time and let's not wait, because you matter and you're too important to wait. But whatever your need, please come while we stand and sing.